Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrud Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2019 comedy drama coming of age story titled Blinded by the Light. Now, Blinded by the Light runs for 1 hour and 57 minutes long. It is directed by Gurinder Chadha. It is produced by Gurinder Chadha, June Barclay, and Jamal Daniel. The script was written by Gurinder Chadha, Paul Medea Burgess, and Sarfraz Manzoor, and it was based on the novel Greetings from Berry Park, Race, Religion, and Rock and Roll by Sarfraz Manzoor. The score was composed by A.R. Rahman, the cinematography by Ben Smithard, and it was edited by Justin Krish. And the stars of the movie are Viviek Kalra, Kulvinder Ghir, Meera Nell Williams, Aaron Phagura, Dean Charles Chapman, Nikita Mehta, Divina, David Hayman, Sally Phillips, Marcus Brigstocke, Olivia Poulet, Frankie Fox, Rob Brydon, and Hayley Atwell. When you explore the outskirts of the metropolitan city of London, England, it seems common that the towns are usually never looked upon as a piece of beauty. In Margaret Thatcher-led 1980s Britain, most of the small cities almost look like ghost towns thanks to the many factories shutting down, people unemployed, lack of consumer products being made, and everyone was pretty much in misery. Of course, the feminists will look up at Margaret Thatcher as being a strong, independent, empowered lady who was a trailblazer for women in politics. Well, be that as it may, she definitely did have her assets, but the things that I have just mentioned before, she also had led, but she and her conservative mindset had also led to a bit of a disintegration of the city of London, with the numerous factories being shut down due to her and her idea of having a much more enviro-friendly environment, which also costed a lot of people's jobs, which eventually led them being laid off. Um, Products consumerism in England, London in particular, was also on a bit of a steady decline. And not everybody seems to have embraced her iron heart and her power of and her power, because even though she may have used her power to great effect, she also at the same time abused her power as well. People had to find their own methods in trying to make money, even delving into jobs like male nudity, horse racing, gambling, ballet, or whatever possible to put food on their table, because they were either furloughed or just simply laid off. Blinded by the Light, under the direction of Gurinder Chadha, explores these insecure issues with as much detail. The results may be satisfying, but sometimes it's presented with an awkward balance of lightness with an unfortunate touch of hyperbole. Now, of course, you all know the name of the song Blinded by the Light was from, of course, Bruce Springsteen's 1975 album Greetings from Asbury Park. It was a big hit by The Boss, but it also was a big hit for Manfred Mann's Earth Band in the late 70s, as they did a cover of this song. Now, even though I know Miss Chadha's intentions were good, but they were still a little bit too light in detail, and there might even been some forms of exaggeration within her context. Although, although I'll praise her for her efforts, they're good. But still, there's a lot of stuff that is a lot of questions that are left unanswered, and it's also taken in a very much light context when it really shouldn't have. So, set in the poverty unstable city of Luton, just outside of London, in the year 1987, we see the economic situation in all of its grim details. From the rundown mills to the shutdown of factories to people looking poor and destitute, this part of town isn't nearly the details we would see on a postcard. And because of that believability, I give her very much a lot of credit in making this movie, set the tone for something very dark, but could have been more executed in a dark fashion if it wasn't taken for too much liberties to make it into mostly a song and dance, almost semi Bollywood style type movie, which I will get to in a bit. Alright, that's the center character in this movie we are introduced to is a young teenager named Javed, played by Viviek Kalra, a lonely social outcast who dreams of becoming something of himself as a means of escaping the doldrums of the things he has to put up with for the time being. He is dealing with a lot on his table, including family issues, racism, alienation, and a way to find independence and happiness. But of course, independence and happiness is kind of like a long way coming for this young man. Sadly, his father, Malik, played by Kulvinder Ghir, lost his job in the car factory, and his mother, Noor, played by Meera, I should say, Ganatra, spends her time at the sewing machine trying her best to keep her family fed while going through these hard times. The hopes of entering a fancy university seems like a shattered dream for Javed, which is too bad because, he comes across as an extremely intelligent individual in spite of his outcast ways. He's a great academic student. He seems to have a steady mind on his shoulders of going places, but because of his family's impoverished situation, Ivy League college seems to be somewhat out of place. Oxford, Cambridge, I guess that's kind of out of the question. Or even if he decides to migrate to the States, I guess Harvard or Princeton or Ivy is out of the question. Or if he wants to go to Canada, I guess you could say McGill or Simon Fraser or whatever type of high esteemed universities. Everything is just put aside. And unfortunately for him, he really has no hopes. Maybe the closest he could probably do is some low income community college, or I guess he'll probably have to take himself into trade school. Javed's troubles are further torched due to the restrictions of his Pakistani background, which definitely was an easy aim for racial and alienation tensions that manifested horrifically in Great Britain at the time. And sure, with Pakistani and foreigners in England seem to have like risen in population. Well, back in the late 80s, there wasn't very many, and back then Britain still had this ideology that it should be for the English only, and that foreigners were certainly not exactly really that greatly welcomed, which is a sad thing. The Nazi ideology hatred towards immigrants was actually approved at the time, especially those of Pakistani extraction. Javed is chastised, bullied, and was definitely racially discriminated by his peers, and that his fascination with poetry, which was his escape from his doldrums, was also an easy target for, guess what? More ridicule. Feeling at his wits' end, Javed suddenly meets up with a Sikh friend who goes by the name of Roops, played by Aaron Phagura, who makes him listen to a cassette. Remember, this was in the 80s, so there was no iPads or iPhones. Hell, they didn't even have DVD players. This was the 80s. So in the 80s, we were still listening to mixtapes on cassettes. So he made him listen to a cassette of the boss, Bruce Springsteen. Never heard the music before. Javed becomes hooked, and this music from the boss becomes kind of like the changing moments of his life. It was like the boss himself, Bruce Springsteen, was actually kind of talking to him, kind of almost like understanding the situations that he's facing with. Because in the Bruce Springsteen catalog, the boss's songs definitely seem to relate precisely to the sheltered life that Javed is living in, like living in poverty, to having no hope in life. So Javed ends up becoming a metaphoric disciple to the words according to the iconic Bruce Springsteen songs. To the iconic Saint Bruce of Springsteen, who was born in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And so next thing you know, he's he's not only um, he's not only just being infatuated by his music, he also seems to have somewhat gone through a bit of a physical transformation. Well, at least in terms of a stylistic transformation, as he is no longer wearing the geeky hand-me-down type clothes that he's been sporting. He is now sporting jeans with white t-shirts and trendy jean jackets in traditional 80s style, which still kind of adds more ridicule since his peers definitely seem to sport more new wave hairdos, which was also kind of trendy back in the 80s. Can't this poor kid win? Well, at least, the music and the inspiration of Bruce Springsteen has kind of given him a new level of confidence, a new lease on life, so to speak. So, Blinded by the Light was definitely loosely based off of the biography of Sarfraz Mansour, Greetings from Bury Park, Race, Religion, and Rock and Roll. And with that being said, the movie sparks a myriad of truth behind it. I guess this is simply, since this is not just simply because it's based off of actual events, but mostly the focus of the movie is an oncoming catalog of Springsteen's songs as a decoy to keep the flow of the story by making our protagonist evolve from an outcast to becoming a more confident young man. The music itself manifests in Javed's head as they break into song and choreography moments and lacks in subtlety along with no apologies. Almost like something taken from the pages of these Bollywood type musicals. It truly makes the city of Luton the antagonist of the story, not the bullies or the people who have put him down or chastised him, but the city of Luton himself itself as the as it makes its marking that this town is truly the threshold of hell. And of course, the more he becomes inspired by Bruce Springsteen's music, the more confident he gets, and the more determined he is to get the hell out of this city of Luton. As a guilty pleasure, I was definitely enthralled by the music. Also, admittedly, I liked the music that Springsteen recorded back in the 1970s and 80s, so I ordered Volume 1 Springsteen album collections between 1973 to 1984. Though as iconic and legendary as Bruce Springsteen, not all his lyrics seem accurate for light fare comedy drama. That's where the big weakness comes in. Sometimes his music is probably taken to the extremes that it could be a bit downright gritty and dark, and is not always providing flattering commentary about how society operates. But then again, with the way how society operates, it doesn't deserve any kind of flattery or approval or reassurance. A lot of the societal loopholes that seem to manifest the city of Luton is just holding him back when he wants to be pushed out. And the only way for him to push out is to regain confidence in himself and to also look for where he wants to go in life and not necessarily let his problems, get to him. He needed an escape. It seems that the music that was written by Springsteen seems to have somewhat came into his life, and it just changed everything from him. For the better, maybe. I'm not gonna say it was for the worse, because it wasn't, because he just became a very, very much more better, confident individual, knowing that life itself may sometimes suck. It's not always that bad. Aside from the light comical touches, Blinded by the Light has deeply serious scenes, like the never-ending father-son confrontations between Javed and Malik, which is kind of understanding. Malik is, down on his luck after getting laid off from his job at the car factory, and now is pretty much mad at the world, and sometimes he'll take his intentions towards his son. The bullying he endured in life from schoolmates and just kids on the street. The conflicts that involved the Nazi-based National Front. The words and wisdom through Bruce Springsteen music was made into, at a time, an endless array of Bollywood-like singing and dancing moments, which at times feels a bit weird and corny. Now I understand that Gurinder Chadha is, although although lives in Britain, she is of Hindi descent. But I don't know. It's just that Springsteen songs could have just been greatly utilized as mostly just a backdrop for the soundtrack. It didn't necessarily have to go into singing and dancing moments. I mean, it's a nice light touch. It might seem a little original, but I just don't think it fits the narrative of the script. Chadha really takes the liberties in Mansoor's memoirs by making it feel like a musical, which is both entertaining at best, for a guilty pleasure, but definitely awkward altogether. Javed's departure from the boondocks of his beloved town to the city where Springsteen was born, Asbury Park, New Jersey, just seems kind of out of nowhere. I mean, all of a sudden, he's got enough money to go to Asbury Park, New Jersey. What about his father and his struggles to make ends meet? And yet he managed just to cough up a few dollars, a few $100, a few $1,000 just to go to Asbury Park. Yes, I know it's set in Britain, so it's actually dealt with in pounds, but ah, it just seems random. Like, where did he get the money to go even into the United States, albeit Asbury Park, New Jersey, the birthplace of Bruce Springsteen? I mean, his family is supposed to be poor. Did he con other classmates? Or have they been saving a nest egg? But if they're going to be saving a nest egg, they should use it for more resourceful stuff. Not just for him to catch a one-way ticket to Asbury Park, New Jersey, just because that's the place where his newly found hero is from. The scene reminds us that we are not in the musical genre, but it feels quite awkward at times. So even though Blinded by the Light is unapologetic in its lightness with an intriguing coming-of-age story, the incoherent scenes take this film mostly as a guilty pleasure and far from a masterpiece. I would have liked it if it was more than just a guilty pleasure, but a serious commentary about a kid struggling through life and then find something that will help change his life forever. That's kind of like what I was leaning towards. But instead it got demoted to just, I'll watch it for a guilty pleasure. I'll sit through it, I'll enjoy it, but will I, in the end, find anything that will inspire me to go anywhere far? Not necessarily, because it's not a masterpiece. It's a guilty pleasure. Big difference. It's a movie we can relate to, as we may have heard a song before that reflected upon us, like that song was written vicariously to us. And sure, it has its share of imperfections, it still provides a fine catalog of Springsteen's classic music we can all sing and dance to. And for those who love his work and the story of providing the poverty and socio-economic situation Britain faced in the 80s, then you might find good things about Blinded by the Light. I mean, I'm not putting Gurinder, Chadha down. This is a good, provocative movie that's definitely one to look into, to invest in. I think it's handled very well. I think the acting is pretty good, even though I didn't mention too much about the acting, but I found some great chemistry. The cast is pretty much mostly a cast of unknowns, and they did their all. They did their best. They definitely put their efforts aside. Nothing really special under the rainbow, but given to the fact that these main principal characters have very little acting experience, they still pulled it off very well. We get a great understanding of Thatcherian life in Britain, which was not all that glorious, but at least, the realism depicted in there is non-biased, unpartisan, and, it's a good little film. I recommend to see this movie. I wish that we would have a little more higher expectations, but unfortunately, that's just not the case. And so for that, when all is said and done, I give Blinded by the Light, out of a scale of 10, I give it a 6. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules: be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Carrot Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.